जय जय श्री राधे श्री वल्लभाधीश की जय सब Vaishnavon को Jai Shri Krishna. Continuing with the readings of the 84 Vaishnav ki Varta, Braj Bhasha and English. Today is the 21st reading. 3 weeks have been completed. And this is the story of Ram Das and it's Varta Prasang 2, Part 2. There was a ditch in front of Sri Acharyaji's door. As he was on his way to bathe in the Sri Yamunaji, he remarked that the ditch had not yet been filled. Some Vaishnavas began to fill it in. Ramdas filled a large basket with soil and managed to fill it in before Sri Acharyaji got back from his bath. When Sri Acharyaji saw Ramdas covered in dust from doing all this, he was very pleased and remarked again on how blessed Ramdas was. Bhav Prakash, the inner meaning. All the other Vaishnavas were delicately filling in the ditch after taking off their usual clothes and wearing the minimum. Ramdas, however, hearing Sri Acharyaji's remark about the ditch and thinking how lucky he was as to be given this chance to serve, dropped all worries about what anyone would think and jumped at the chance to serve. Sri Acharyaji was very pleased that he retained no personal pride whilst serving. No Seva was too messy or humbling for him, and he regarded all opportunities to serve as his great fortune. Wow. In 1 year, Ramdas earned enough to go back to full-time Seva. Bhav Prakash, Sri Thakurji had just wanted to test Ramdas's perseverance. He could have given him the wealth at any time. Varta Prasang 3, one day, Ramdas's wife told him to remarry in order to beget a child. Ramdas's wife did not have any understanding of his inner heart and thought he was displeased with her, so she told him to get another wife in order to get a son. Part 3 continued. Ramdas told her that he had no desire for a son. She reiterated that she did want one. Ramdas told her that if she worshipped their Sri Thakurji Shinamanit Priyaji in the mood of his mother and with nice food offerings, then her desire could be satisfied. She did conceive and give birth after some time. Bhav Prakash. Ramdas had said this from a spiritual mindset, namely, that she would achieve her ambition of being a mother if she treated their Sri Thakurji as a child, for she would become as Mother Yashodaji. However, the wife did not have such sublime understanding and still worshipped in order to get a worldly son. Sri Thakurji granted her wish. Ramdas, on the other hand, never had such worldly desire, and the wife could not attain that mindset. Sri Thakurji was always very pleased with Ramdas, whose heart is impossible to fully describe. Ramdas was a recipient of Sri Acharyaji's great grace. There is truly no end to his story, and thus concludes Varta 7, the story of Ramdas. Now we carry on to Varta number 8, the story of Gadadhar Das Kapil, a Saraswat Brahmin from Kura. Bhav Prakash, for in the inner meaning. For years and years, Gadadhar Das would go to Prayag to bathe on the occasion of Makara Sankranti. 1 year, Sri Acharyaji came there at the same time. Many holy men would come there to him for discussions. In Prayag, Gadadhar Das used to stay with his uncle, who was very learned but a devotee of Shivji. The uncle told Gadadhar Das that he was going to visit Sri Acharyaji to inquire about some points of philosophy. Gadadhar Das decided to go with him. The uncle asked Sri Acharyaji, "The Lord is one, but why is it that in Vaishnava tradition he appears to be worshipped in many a form? For example, Krishna, Ram, Narasimha and Narayana, etc. Which one is the real Lord?" Sri Acharyaji replied, "An all-powerful ruler commands the whole country, whilst there are, within that kingdom, kings of various little regions or states. These latter have to follow the former, but they are all known as kings. In the same way, Sri Krishna is the full manifestation of Godhead, and he commands everyone. Then there are the partial manifestations who follow his orders. They are all dressed as Lord." This silenced Gadadhar Das's uncle. Gadadhar Das, on the other hand, was a Devi Jeev, and the only question he wanted to ask was whether Sri Acharyaji would initiate him as his disciple so that he could realize Sri Krishna. Gadadhar Das prostrated to Sri Acharyaji and humbly requested him to accept him, for he had already wandered around too much and too long in this world. Sri Acharyaji told him to first consult with his uncle, for, as he said, he should not be given grief through your choice. Gadadhar Das's uncle replied that he only knew the Gayatri mantra and nothing else, and that to Gadadhar's question he had neither said yes nor no. Gadadhar Das then said to Sri Acharyaji, "Now I am your servant and remove myself from the ways of the world. I surrender to you alone. Please accept me." The uncle was not a Vaishnava, and he did not want to hear that his nephew was asking to be a servant. He stood up and left that place. Sri Acharyaji was very pleased with Gadadhar Das. He had not yet been initiated, but already knew the essence of surrender. Sri Acharyaji told him to go and bathe in the Triveni Sangam, Prayag, and then to return in pure clothing in Aparas. Sri Acharyaji next initiated him with the Lord's name and the Brahma Sambandha. Gadadhar Das then asked Sri Acharyaji what were his duties in life, and the latter told him to find a Krishna deity and serve him. Gadadhar Das said that his uncle had a deity in his house, but didn't know how he could attain it because he did not want to speak to his faithless uncle. Gadadhar Das put on a necklace of sacred tulsi beads and made a holy mark on his forehead and then stepped outside. His uncle was there, and he said to Gadadhar Das, "Okay, so you become a Vaishnava, but you should still come to my house." Gadadhar Das replied that he would only come if his uncle agreed to give him the Krishna deity that he had there. The uncle was all for it and said that he had no need for such a deity at home. So Gadadhar Das went there and asked for the deity. The uncle told him that he should have lunch there first and then take the deity. Gadadhar Das said that he was no longer willing to drink water at his house and that he should just hand over the Thakurji. The uncle said that since they were not making seva and were devotees of Shiva, then by all means he should take the deity. Sri Thakurji made the uncle very favourable to quickly giving away the deity because he didn't want to stay in a place that a great Vaishnava had chosen to leave. Sri Acharyaji bathed the deity in the 5 nectars and named him Sri Madan Mohanji. This was the golden deity of Sri Krishna. Gadadhar Das stayed with Sri Acharyaji for 3 days and learnt from him all the ways of seva. Sri Mahaprabhuji has written the treatise Bhakti Vardhini, How to Increase Devotion. Now he discussed with these 2 lines, Avyavrito bhajet Krishnam pujaya shravanadipihi. If you have no other occupation, you should serve Sri Krishna lovingly through listening to his pastimes, and Vyavrito pi haro chittam shravanado nyayet Shravanado nyayet tada. If you have an occupation, work keeping Sri Hari in your heart and whilst listening to his pastimes and performing other devotional practices. Considering the state of not being otherwise occupied to be superior, Gadadhar Das decided not to do anything other than seva. He took his leave of Sri Acharyaji and returned to his home in Orcha. He was unmarried and his parents had both already passed on, and he was about 30 years old. He asked all his other relatives to go and live somewhere else because he was now a Vaishnava and that he would not drink water they had touched. He then cleaned out the whole house and began to nicely serve Sri Madan Mohanji. Sri Madan Mohanji began to let Gadadhar Das experience his presence. Before becoming a Vaishnava, he had lived off donations from his religious clients, but now he wanted to be without an occupation and he stopped going anywhere and just survived on what came to him. He kept his mind fully engaged in contemplation on the Lord's seva in his heart, which is the best reward of such seva. He was always thus deeply engaged in the Lord's seva with all his consciousness. He served with his body and wealth and any other way that he could. He did not amass any wealth. Whatever he had, he spent on foodstuffs for offering to Sri Madan Mohanji. He shared the prasad with other Vaishnavas and lived in a renounced manner. One day it so happened that 0 income came. This was also the plan of the Lord. Sri Thakurji created this situation of 0 income as a test for Gadadhar Das. It is not so hard to take a vow not to work, but when there is absolutely nothing left, then patience and perseverance is mighty difficult. Part 1 continued. He offered a jug of water at Mangala, early morning service, and the same in Shringar and Rajbhog periods, adornment and lunch. This continued right up to the final evening service, but he still refused to borrow anything. Bhav Prakash. This is how business works. When you borrow money, you're in its service until it is repaid, and that depletes your divine seva. There is no relying on time. If you have borrowed money and die, then that debt sits upon your head, so to speak, and then you have to be reborn just to pay it back. These are the words of the scriptures, although Gadadhar Das had made his own decision based on the teachings of Sri Acharyaji's Bhakti Vardhini treatise. The day turned into night and Gadadhar Das went to sleep, but his heart was burning with the thought that his Sri Thakurji had been hungry all day long. Inner meaning, Bhav Prakash. Although Gadadhar Das had only seemingly offered water, from his heart he had offered all sorts of preparations, and Sri Thakurji had accepted them all. In the eternal Leela, Gadadhar Das is a Sakhi of Sri Radha Sahachari called Kalakanti, one of the Kumarika gopis who has great faith in Sri Yamunaji. When Radha Sahachari sings, then Kalakanti joins in, and her singing is very beautiful. When Gadadhar Das made all the offerings with water, it was in the mood of love of Sri Yamunaji, and because of that dedication, all the offerings were perfect and well prepared. Vaishnavas do not prepare anything for just their own satisfaction. They do not prepare them to serve their own senses. They prepare and make the offerings by hand, whilst contemplating the ways and love of the Vraja gopis and all the various ways in which they try to please their beloved. This is the essential way of the Pushti Marg, to prepare and offer by hand. If all of this is not done with love, then the mood of the Vraja gopis is broken, and offerings become like those of the path of lawful limitations, as it is stated in the Gita-ji that Sri Thakurji accepts anything offered to him, as in leaf, flower, fruit, or water. Patram pushpam palam toyam, as long as it is offered with devotion. So the offerings are made just like that, and no special preparation is insisted upon. The Gita-ji states that he will accept these offerings when made by a devotee, because a devotee will exercise care. A devotee should also have affection. Whatever kind of leaf they offer, they take it out of the bunch and carefully get it ready. A person on the path of knowledge would offer just any type of leaf, whether it is bitter or sweet. As for the flowers mentioned, the devotee takes those rose petals and makes cooling rose petal jam, gulkand, out of them. The devotees make sure any fruit they offer is sweet, even by tasting them first. Although the Bilini lady Shabari was not a Pushti Vaishnava, she was a great devotee, and therefore, when she was going to offer Lord Ramji some fruit, she tasted them first just to make sure that there were no insects in them and that they were not hard. If the fruits were in any way unsuitable for offering, she would know this first. She could not let Sri Ramji suffer in any way. Afterwards, Sri Ramji said that he had never ever tasted such fruit as these, either in his own town or even at the home of his spouse Sitaji. They do not have that type of love, he explained. A devotee is very careful in the offerings, but the others offer leaves in whatever condition they come. Gadadhar Das is connected to the eternal Leela, and so he offered the water with great love and care. At the same time, his heart was burning with grief because Sri Thakurji had gone hungry. He regretted that he had not been able to feed the Vaishnavas either. This was the type of deep, secret love he had in his heart. Sri Thakurji always likes to let his adherents suffer divinely, and so he arranged for the situation of there being no money at all. His heart burnt so much, Gadadhar Das reaped the reward of feeling separation from the Lord, and through this he gained some devotional status with Sri Krishna. The supreme reward of the path of grace is pain of separation. In this way, nearly 5 hours of the night passed by. Part 1 continued. Then all of a sudden, one of his religious customers arrived there. He called out to Gadadhar Das, who opened the door to let him in. He then presented Gadadhar Das with 4 rupees and some cloth. He explained that they had a Shraddha ceremony in the house and that this was the money offering set aside for him on that occasion. The client went home, but Gadadhar Das immediately desired to make a special offering to his lord. He quickly went to the shops, having decided to spend one of the rupees on foodstuffs. Then he saw a sweet maker who had cooked a whole bunch of jalebi. He asked him if anybody had already bought some from that lot, but the sweet maker replied that he had just made them, and so far no one had bought any. Gadadhar Das had some weighed, paid for them, and ran home to bathe and make the offering. He then put his Sri Thakurji to sleep, called several Vaishnavas over, and fed them the prasad. He himself went to bed hungry, but very contented that his lord had eaten, and the Vaishnava did not have to miss their prasad. The next day he did the same thing, spending the remaining 3 rupees. One of the Vaishnavas remarked that although they had prepared the same thing, it did not taste half as nice as Gadadhar Das's. They asked him how he had made them. He explained how the day before there had been nothing to eat in his house, but that 4 rupees suddenly arrived in the evening, with which he had purchased 1 rupee's worth of jalebis for the offering. The Vaishnavas were very happy to hear this. Thus concludes our reading for today, day 21. in the middle of the story of Gadadhar Das. Tomorrow we could continue with the inner meaning of this paragraph. So, Jai Jai Shri Radhe, Shri Vallabhadisha ki Jai ho, Mahaprabhu ji ki Jai, Shri Govardhan Nath ji ki Jai, Shri Navneet Priji Shri Madan Mohan ji ki Jai, Sarva Vaishnavan ko Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Jai Shri Radhe.